Welcome to The Topic, where we highlight Houston Community College, our students, our programs, and our reach into the community. I'm Amy Tan. March is Women's History Month. On today's topic, we're talking with 3 women at HCC, each with a unique perspective on the celebration. First up, we're joined by Dr. Cheryl Peters, the Executive Director of our Honors College and Weekend College. Dr. Peters, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Amy.
Dr. Peters has a special passion for one of our favorite authors, Zora Neale Hurston. To start us off, for those of us who aren't familiar with her work, can you give us an introduction and place her in a little context?
Yes, I'd be thrilled to do that. I want to say that, first of all, I became interested in Hurston because, first of all, simply because we were both Floridians, and I went to college about 40 miles from where Hurston grew up in Eatonville in the Sanford area. And I couldn't believe that in college, neither in my time at Stetson University in DeLand, nor going later to graduate school, that I had ever heard of Hurston. And there was a part of me that was kind of angry that, how could I have gone to school 40 miles away from one of the great American novelists and never have heard of her? That's one of the things that caused me to be interested in her. She was probably the most famous woman who was a part of the Harlem Renaissance in the 20s, and she knew everybody. And her great book, Their Eyes Were Watching God, is the book that everyone starts with first, and you should start with first when you first get involved with Hurston.
Absolutely. I know that she is revered by most English majors, right? Most of us out there. So Zora is also treasured by some other important figures in women's history. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, Zora she had a time of being rediscovered, and she was everywhere in the late 80s and in the 90s. She was on the cover of every magazine. The University of Illinois reissued all of her books. She'd been out of print for a very long time. But one of the most important persons who promoted her career was Alice Walker. Alice Walker took the time to go back and find Zora's grave in Fort Pierce, Florida. She paid to have a very lovely gravestone placed on it. And I'm telling you, when I've been to that very place, and this is a field of weeds. It is still a field of weeds today. But the way you know where to find Zora's grave is by looking for the only thing that's even evident. So Alice Walker did a huge amount, in addition to also putting out a good anthology of her works. And that was very, very important. And then later, when Zora became hot in the literary world sense, Oprah Winfrey also became very interested in her work and decided to produce do a production of Their Eyes Were Watching God, her most famous novel. And I believe that Oprah actually took a role in this. I'm not quite sure, but at any rate, Oprah, with her book club and with her discussion and with her millions of dollars, and had the money to bring her reputation forward. So in the early 90s, there were a couple of Zora Neale Hurston Festival of the Arts in Florida, in Eatonville. By the way, Eatonville is a sort of suburb of Orlando now that's grown enormously. But I had the good fortune to go to both of those at my own expense because I wanted to go. And that really helped to promote her career and make her an author that everyone became interested in.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much to Alice Walker and in particular and Oprah Winfrey for bringing her into the pop culture, not just the literary culture.
Right.
And you've spoken a little bit about how you've traveled to walk in her footsteps and honor her. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes. In 1988, I was developing the Women in Lit course curriculum that I taught that course for several years. But I made a trip over the Christmas holidays. I went to the University of Florida, where I had spent my first year. I went to the rare book room and was able to look at all of her early manuscripts that still survived. At the time of her death, the sheriff and others went out to try to find if there was anything of value of where she lived. And not finding anything, the literary stuff didn't mean they actually set fire to a number of the works, which somebody came by and put out. So in the rare book room, you can see a lot of handwritten manuscripts that are burned around the edges. And those were documents erased from the fire. So after that, a companion and I, we went then to Eatonville and talked to nearly all the people that were there. Eatonville is still a small place, but I learned about the upcoming festivals and decided that I would definitely come. And then after Eatonville, we drove down to Fort Pierce, which is actually where she spent her last years and where she's buried. And I was able to go to her burial ground, take flowers to her grave, photograph the little house that she lived in her last few years, and then later returned to the two festivals that they had in her name, that Alice Walker and Ruby Dee was also there. They put on performances. Ruby Dee apparently did something for the stage in Broadway. So Zora finally had her time. She was unrecognized and died sort of not unloved. She was known in her community, but she'd lost her literary reputation at the time. And but it was definitely recovered in every way, shape, and form.
Thankfully recovered literally from the ashes.
Yes, yes.
So we just have about 60 seconds left. But would you tell us briefly how you've incorporated her work into your classes and what has been the students' reaction?
In the Women in Lit course, I required them. This was the only extra novel they had to buy that was out of the textbook. And every one of my students, and probably because of my enthusiasm for her, I told them, I said, you know, reading it, you have to work with it a little bit so you can pick up the wonderful language. But at the end of the course, everyone said that was their very favorite reading. And of course, I showed them the slideshow of the trip, and, you know, that meant a lot. And then at Central College during that time, I did 3 major presentations in one of our big lecture halls that were packed with students, faculty, and others to show pictures of the trip, to bring in books. And I spoke numerous times to English teacher associations around the city to help spread the word too. So I was out there, and the students just simply adored Zora Neale Hurston's work.
That's been my experience too. She really speaks to our students.
Yes, yes.
Well, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to coming and speaking with me about Zora Neale Hurston. We're gonna head to a commercial, and when we come back, we'll talk more about women in literature.
Thank you.
Sometimes what you need just shows up. Houston Community College has your back, whether you're knocking out some basics or upping your game for a better job. Enroll today for spring classes and frame your future with HCC.
For more than a year, we have kept you informed with more than 500 remote episodes. But now we're back, bigger and better, with more news and more guests. Join us live every weekday at 10 a.m. on Facebook and YouTube, and on HCC TV at noon and 5 p.m. You can watch from anywhere. We go where you go.
welcome back to The Topic. We're celebrating Women's History Month, and now we're joined by Dr. Melissa Miller-Waters, who is serving as our director for the Accreditation, Evaluation, and Planning, Strategy Planning, and Institutional Effectiveness. Dr. Miller-Waters wears a lot of hats here at HCC and has been a longtime faculty member. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so thrilled to be here with the women on this panel who have influenced me so much and have been role models for me. I'm so appreciative.
I'm so happy to have you here, and I'm looking forward to talking to you. You have a long history of studying the role of women in society. Can you share a little bit about your work, particularly your dissertation?
Sure. Like Dr. Peters, it was Zora Neale Hurston who really set me on a path, who showed me that women writers had a unique thing to bring to the literary table. Where I ended up was in a pretty heady kind of place. I took a couple of women theorists and philosophers, Eve Koski Sedgwick and Judith Butler, and I took their theories and applied them to contemporary women writers in America and also in Britain. And one of the things that Eve Koski Sedgwick did was talk about triangles in literature. Typically, it's two men vying for the love and affection of a woman. And what she did was read those triangles in the terms of sort of a patriarchal exchange, that the most important relationship was really between the two guys who were vying for the woman. So what I did was flip her triangle and say, what if women writers are really writing to each other, that they're taking these typical kind of patriarchal narratives, they're turning them inside out, they're doing crazy things with them in a way for them to communicate with each other across literature, across the ocean. So I looked at women writers who were kind of outliers, not so much now, but very much so then. So I looked at Angela Carter, I looked at Kathy Acker, I also looked at Christine Brooke Rose, and lastly, who's the third? Amy, can you help me with who was the fourth?
There
was another one, and she was great, and it'll come to me in a minute.
Did you say Angela Carter?
Yes.
Yeah.
It'll come to me later.
This is how it is, right? You get a couple of years past the dissertation, and then I can't remember any of the books in that.
Right.
But those are some of my favorites, and I enjoyed the opportunity that I had to read some of those novels with you and to talk about them.
Right.
Fun women characters, amazing things that they're doing with the narrative.
Yeah.
And you go ahead.
Oh no, you're right. Taking those sort of typical narratives and reimagining them, the quest narrative, all those fairy tales. They were just super fun and imaginative.
And you taught courses at HCC, and one of them is Women in Literature. And I'm sure that all that work you did on your dissertation influenced your class. Why is focusing on women so important?
It's so important. And I think one of the things that made it really important to me is I came out of a K through 12, pretty typical traditional education, where we read all of the great male writers, right? And so having a course that reframes and re-looks at sort of a literary tradition that hasn't typically been historically taught was really groundbreaking for me personally when it finally happened for me, and I think it is for our students. Our students are very used to reading novels, works written by men. And so having the opportunity to read the women all together is special. Now, what is tough about a Women in Lit course is that you have 3 months and you have to figure out how you're going to select works that are representative for all of the different experiences, all the different kinds of people who identify as women. And you have 3 months to plant seeds in those students. It's tough.
It's so tough. It's so rewarding. I know the students in the class, they bond over that literature. They see themselves in that literature, and it's just an amazing thing to be a part of.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned the authors in your dissertation. What are some of your favorite authors to teach in the class?
Well, so in that course, one of the things that I did was you have to figure out a method that you're going to use to include authors and exclude authors. So one of the things I did was I started with 20th century and then just went forward so that I could include all of the genres, so that I could include plays and poetry and short stories and novels. And so we read everyone from Virginia Woolf to Edith Wharton to Mansfield, to Maxine Hong Kingston, to Sylvia Plath, right? I mean, all of the great writers, Dorothy Parker, Joyce Carol Oates, Gloria Anzaldúa, right? I mean, and Leslie Mormon Silko, trying to give a little example of what all is out there for women. I would often open and close the class with plays. I would open with Trifles, which is this great one-act play about, it's kind of like a murder mystery that sets up the audience as the jury. You got to figure out what really happened based on the clues in the play. And I would end with a more contemporary play called Wit, about a professor who ends up with a really serious cancer and decides that she is going to take experimental treatments for her cancer as a way to help women in the future. And you know, it's a great way to sort of bookend a course. Certainly, it's the first time a student would have thought that they could read a play, right? So that's what I did with those courses.
It sounds like a wonderful way to bookend the course and really bring the students in. So we don't have a lot of time
right.
left, about 60 seconds, but I do, could you talk briefly about feminism? I mean, is it even really possible to define it, and how has it changed?
It's really not possible to define it in 60 seconds. There are multiple definitions. I can say that in general, it's a movement of ideology, socio-political, that it really wants equality in social, economic, political. We used to say between the sexes, but now we would say among genders, right? And when students would get to read all of these works by women, a lot of times what would happen is that it would be a mostly female classroom. And it was probably those young women's first opportunity to have a voice, to have a strong voice, and to recognize some inequalities that might be playing out in their own lives that they hadn't really noticed before.
100%. And you can see that happening. And again, just emphasizing how important these classes are to our students. So I want to thank you for being here today and talking to us about some of your favorite authors and the work that you've done. When we return, we'll learn how HCC nurtures women leaders.
Sometimes what you need just shows up. Houston Community College has your back, whether you're knocking out some basics or upping your game for a better job. Enroll today for spring classes and frame your future with HCC.
When I was your age, I was just like you, fascinated by stars. But now I get to search for life in the universe. And who knows, maybe life is looking for us too.
So we're like aliens to them?
Yeah. Does anyone want to be a scientist now?
I do.
Awesome. We need more girls in STEM.
Maybe we can find aliens.
Things could be stranger, but I don't know how. I'm going through changes. Through all of the strangeness, I'm going through changes now.
Welcome back to The Topic. We continue our discussion of women's history with Dr. Margaret Ford Fisher, president of our online college. Welcome to the show, Dr. Ford Fisher.
You are so welcome. Thank you so much. And as Dr. Miller Waters said, I am absolutely honored to be here with such outstanding guests. And of course, with you doing such a marvelous job, Dr. Tan.
Oh, thank you. It is my first time hosting The Topic, and I'm thrilled to be here. So can you talk to us a little bit about why Women's History Month is important?
You know, this is really a very important topic, and I'd like to say Happy Women's History Month to everyone out there, the women and the men included. And I think it's very important primarily because it serves as a reminder of the struggles and the triumphs of women. That's really critically important. And then, of course, it also provides a glimpse into what is possible for women as well, through the mentorships, through the role modeling, et cetera. And then, of course, finally, to provide the role models for other women and for young girls. That's why it's so important. And I think based upon some of the conversations previously in the show, I'd like to talk about Neale Hurston as well. I think Laura Neale Hurston and her most wonderful book, Their Eyes Were Watching God, was so impactful. I taught English, and of course, Dr. Peters and I taught English together as we started out here at HCC. But two of the quotes that I think are critically important as well, and that also point to your question to answer it, Dr. Tan, is number one, as we think about some of Zora Neale Hurston's quotes, she said, "Love makes your soul crawl out from its hiding place." That was a quote that really had a positive impact upon me. And then the other one was, no matter how far a person can go, the horizon is still way beyond you. So I think as we think about Zora Neale Hurston and we think about women today, you know, that glass ceiling for the most part has been broken in so many different ways. And with the role modeling, with the women who are quite successful now, throughout various fields, I think it points to that, you know, you just keep striving and you continue to uplift and to support other women on their journey as well. I was reading some information also in the Women's History Museum, and I thought it was very interesting because as we look at women and the success, there was a lady by the name of Jeanette Rankin, who was the very first woman elected to Congress in 1917. Often we're not told about that. And over the 300 years of, you know, as we start thinking about all of those women who've gone into Congress, about 300, I understand, have done that since 1917. But it took the first one to make that difference. And I think when you see that role model and you see that glass ceiling being broken, then the other aspirants feel like they can achieve as well. And I think that's very important.
Absolutely. And again, you know, coming back to the work that we do here at Houston Community College, I think, you know, sometimes our students don't even know, right? They don't know there's a glass ceiling, you know, and I think of myself, right? As a young woman, you know, I was naive at one time. It was a while ago, but you know, just confronting that and understanding it and being exposed to it. And so in light of that, those beautiful words by Hurston and this concept of a glass ceiling and helping other women and girls to see it, how can we empower women?
I think being a mentor to young women is really very important, because when you're in the room, you can be the advocate, you can be the sponsor for other young women. And we know that in many instances, boardrooms are still primarily male dominated. We know that many of the individuals who are in the Fortune 500 C-suites, et cetera, they are male dominated for the most part, but there are women who are moving into those roles. But for the women who are able to move into those positions, it's very important to be a sponsor or a mentor for other women, because then that sets up that dynamic for other young women to see the role model there who will help them to excel and have aspirations as well.
Well, and Dr. Ford Fisher, I have to share with you that you were one of the women at HCC who inspired me. And when I was first hired at HCC as an adjunct and then a full-time member, I was really comforted, and I felt again inspired by the role where I could see women in executive leadership roles. And that was a wonderful thing for me coming into the institution as a new faculty member. Can you talk a little bit more about how HCC helps women and young girls succeed?
Absolutely, and thank you so very much for that. I think as we look at some of the programs that we have, and many of them are incorporated in a lot of the training that we do, there is one program, Black Girls Coding, that made a significant impact. And I think it really inspired a lot of young girls to pursue coding as one example. Another is Girls in STEM, the Eastside campus. It's having an event that focuses on that. And when we talk about STEM, we're talking about science, technology, engineering, and math. And of course, as you start thinking about the arts, that's included as well to make it STEAM. But I think when we have those kinds of programs, it really awakens a thirst in the young girls to pursue it. And they have to be introduced to it. They have to be able to see and to feel, to touch exactly what it will mean for them, and they can be inspired by that. Women business entrepreneurs as well. That's another program that the Houston Community College offers. And then, of course, Dr. Peters made reference to women in literature. And you can see how through the arts, through literature, et cetera, you can inspire young girls to write their own stories. There are career fields that are available where young girls or young women are recruited into them just like the young men are. So all of those avenues really make a significant difference in helping us as an institution to mentor young women and older women as well to achieve their best life. That's right.
Because many of our students are not necessarily coming right out of high school. We have our average age is I think 28. So absolutely. And Dr. Ford Fisher, thank you so much for coming and speaking on this very important topic.
You are so welcome.
Thank you all for joining us on the topic. For more information on this, visit hccs.edu/podcast. For the topic on HCC TV, I'm Amy Tan.